and then you watched his behavior post losing the Heisman, he's undraftable now.
Yep.
Diego just absolutely turned people off. It's number one, I ain't drafted a 5'9" quarterback anyway. I'm certainly not drafting a 5'9" quarterback who's got an attitude. Spanish Shador.
Do not do something that you're going to end up apologizing for. This man done went from America's sweetheart, America's underdog, to literally a person that people despise and hate.
Never know, maybe he'll file a waiver and come back another year.
He was called the most polarizing quarterback in college football. The JUCO underdog who crashed the Heisman stage, the guy who beat Alabama when nobody thought Vanderbilt even had a chance, the guy had the stats, he had the confidence, and he had the spotlight. And then, in front of every NFL front office in the country, he sat and watched 3 days of the draft pass without ever hearing his name. And the crazy part is that he probably did it to himself. Today I want to talk about Diego Pavia, the Heisman finalist who showed the world what happens when you cannot get out of your own way. Because it wasn't just his height that scared teams off, though I'm sure that was a part of it. It wasn't his arm strength, it wasn't potential scheme fits, it was his decision making off the field. It was how he routinely allowed his emotions to get the better of him, and clearly 32 NFL franchises came together to tell the public that they didn't want to deal with the headache. So how does a Heisman finalist quarterback end up with a tryout invite instead of a contract? Diego Pavia's rise is genuinely one of the better stories college football has produced in years. He didn't come off a 5-star recruiting trail with blue chip programs bidding for his commitment. He came from junior college with 0 stars, the kind of player most programs don't look at twice. He eventually found a home at New Mexico State before transferring to Vanderbilt, a program better known historically for producing Rhodes Scholars than NFL draft picks. What he did there was nothing short of remarkable. In his final season, in 2025, Pavia completed 70.6% of his passes for 3,500 yards, 29 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions. He added 862 rushing yards and 10 more touchdowns on the ground as well. He led the entire SEC in completion percentage, passer rating, and passing touchdowns. Not to mention that Vanderbilt had their first ever 10-win season on top of it. This guy beat Alabama, he beat Tennessee, he became the school's first Heisman Trophy finalist in program history. By every measurable standard here, you can argue that Diego Pavia was the best quarterback in college football's most competitive conference in 2025. And the NFL noticed, because of course they did. Early projections had him going anywhere from the 2nd to the 5th round. The scouts were watching and the door was completely open for him. But then Pavia himself decided that he wanted to close it and lock himself out. It all started on the night of the Heisman Trophy ceremony, December 14th, 2025 in New York City. Pavia finished second, the runner-up to Indiana's Fernando Mendoza, and losing the Heisman is genuinely devastating. Nobody's going to pretend otherwise, certainly not me. Most people would understand a guy needing a moment to breathe, but what came next isn't something that gets taken lightly at the NFL level, which was an emotional crash-out. Within hours of the ceremony, when he was announced that he did not win the Heisman, Pavia posted to his Instagram story, "F all the voters, but family for life," alongside a photo with his offensive lineman. That alone would have raised eyebrows in front offices across the league, but then came the party afterwards. Pavia was photographed at a nightclub, standing near a sign that read F Indiana, and raising his middle finger for the camera. And he posted this himself on his own social media. Like this wasn't a leak or somebody just happening to photograph him out in his element. No, he did this himself. This was a post himself. On what should have been a night for humility and for grace and for showing 32 NFL franchises exactly the kind of professional that he could be even when he was losing. Instead, he went clubbing and threw profanities at anybody he could find. And not to mention, Mendoza is like the last person I would have this type of crash out on. He has been nothing but respectful, kind, and loving to anybody around him throughout the draft process and throughout the entire season really with Indiana. There is a reason he went first overall and Pavia went undrafted. The difference certainly wasn't only his stats and play on the field, it was their mental differences as well. By the next morning, after Pavia's club pictures went viral, he issued an apology, called it a mistake, and said he respected the voters and Mendoza. But the damage was already done, as you could probably expect. Heisman voter Chase Goodbrid called it, and I quote, a punk move, and ESPN's Reese Davis went on air and said the behavior made him regret casting his vote for Pavia at all. And in boardrooms across the league, that nightclub clip started circulating. This wasn't just like bad optics for Pavia or something, this was for a lot of evaluators a window into who Pavia really was under pressure, and when he is losing. NFL organizations have way too much on the line to give a draft pick up to somebody who will cause more problems than solutions. They need to be able to trust somebody on and off the field if they want to use a pick on you. But then comes the NFL Combine in Indianapolis, which should have been Pavia's reset. An opportunity for him to walk into those interview rooms, show 32 teams the polished, coachable, and professional version of himself, the kind that, wants to be drafted. Counteract the narrative that was already building. But instead the narrative accelerated in more ways than one. First things first, Pavia measured in at 5'10", the only quarterback at the entire combine shorter than 6 feet. Height concerns for quarterbacks aren't new, and they certainly weren't new for Pavia beforehand, but this certainly didn't make it any easier. At the end of the day, though, I can imagine that plenty of evaluators were willing to move past the height concerns if the other boxes got checked. The other boxes were not getting checked. The second thing I want to mention here at this draft process is that he came in without an agent. And his reasoning is, this is a direct quote, "Ain't nobody taking my money." So, I mean, on the surface, you could come to a conclusion that this is all just confidence in himself and his abilities, but there is a very fine line to be walked between confidence and arrogance. And we saw what happens if you float more towards arrogance in these interviews just last year, when Shedeur Sanders was projected to be a top 10 selection, and then fell all the way to the 5th round. You would think Pavia would reconsider this type of route given what the league demonstrated they would do to someone who is perceived as arrogant. So when teams are informed that you don't have an agent because they ain't taking your money, it just comes off as a guy who has no interest in being advised in any capacity. I mean, how can you coach a guy like that? But it gets worse, because this is around the time when these scout quotes came out, which is the third part of this whole combine disaster that happened for Pavia. NFL Network's Tom Pelissero gathered assessments from across the league, and they painted a very blunt picture for him. An NFL scouting director said, and I quote, "The whole shtick gets old, little bit of Johnny football, it's more lore and college BS than it is really true mystique or allure. I just don't think he's overly talented." And an AFC scouting director raised a different concern, one that everyone who followed Pavia closely already saw coming. He said, and I quote, "I don't think he's going to embrace being a backup. He's coming to take someone's job, and it's going to be kind of an interesting dynamic wherever he goes. The brothers will also be in the stands." That reference to his brother's role in Javier was not accidental. The two had repeatedly drawn law enforcement attention at Vanderbilt games throughout Pavia's time there. And when teams asked during interviews whether he distanced himself from potential distractions, his answer was reportedly simple: "They are coming with me, those are my guys, they ain't going anywhere." And for a quarterback trying to convince an NFL front office to invest a draft pick in him, that is exactly the wrong answer. And to a degree, it does suck. I totally understand wanting to stick with your family and your close friends as they support you through this process. But at the same time, NFL organizations need to be free from drama. They need to be free from scandals. Pavia has complete understanding the trouble that his brothers have caused him in the past, and will not budge on distancing himself. I feel to a certain extent he'd at least have to tell teams he'd think about it if things started to go bad. For example, look at Patrick Mahomes and his family. When everything started to pop up and all that drama surrounded him, do you really hear from them anymore? No, you don't. Regardless, it's just yet another problem that popped up on NFL radars. So let's get down to draft day now in Pittsburgh. Round 1 came and went, and 2 quarterbacks heard their names called, with Diego Pavia not being one of them. Then came round 2, then round 3, and still nothing. By day 3, the final rounds, the writing was on the wall, he probably wasn't going to get selected. When the 2026 NFL Draft concluded, Diego Pavia had become the first Heisman Trophy finalist to go undrafted since 2014. 12 years. It has been 12 years since a player reached the Heisman stage and walked away from draft weekend without a single team calling. And his response, as mature as ever, he posted an Instagram story that said, "F the NFL, I write my own path." This was deleted within hours, as you could probably expect, because somebody probably informed him that this was not a good idea, but screenshots had already spread across every major sports platform. And in those same front offices that had just passed on him, phones were buzzing with a notification of this Instagram story, and they all likely thought the same thing. Of course he posted that. The guy just immediately proves all of these prior concerns correct just minutes after the final pick got announced. And here's where the story takes one final interesting turn. In the days following the draft, reports emerged that Pavia had accepted an invitation to the Baltimore Ravens rookie minicamp. It is scheduled for May 1st through the 3rd. Not a signed contract, not a depth chart spot, just a tryout. He will be competing for a chance to prove he belongs on an NFL roster. And honestly, the Ravens aren't even a bad landing spot for him considering their offensive system. Pavia probably needs to remain mobile and take advantage of his legs, which is what Baltimore already tries to do with Lamar Jackson. The offensive scheme could cover some of his flaws. The problem, however, is that he is never going to be beating out Jackson for the starting job. His attitude going into this tryout has to be that he's okay as just a backup, and that he can work hard to get a starting opportunity down the line. If he comes into Baltimore thinking that he's just going to steal the job from Lamar, then we will hear another crash out from him on social media sooner rather than later. So really, the question is whether or not Diego Pavia can check his ego long enough to earn a spot on Baltimore's roster. All in all, I'd like to say that I don't think Diego Pavia is a bad quarterback. His college production was legitimate, his athletic profile, size concerns aside, is competitive at the NFL level. He can actually move quite well. And his 2025 stat line to a 6'3" prospect with no behavioral baggage, and that player is very likely a high draft pick, no question. But pro football is a business, and businesses do not invest draft capital in question marks when cheaper alternatives exist, especially when those cheaper alternatives are drama-free. Every move Pavia made from December forward, ever since the Heisman night post, going to a nightclub, the decision to skip an agent, the post-draft Instagram story, I mean, it all just showed that they weren't lapses in judgment. This is just him as a person, something that isn't going to disappear just because he's on an NFL roster. And this doesn't mean he's a bad person or a bad teammate. He's just a guy who comes off as being more obsessed with his own value, brand, circle, and narrative that he will never choose professionalism over that. And in the NFL, that's a trade-off you can't afford to make before you've ever even earned the right to make it. Johnny Manziel had talent too, and so did a dozen of other players whose stories ended the exact same way. Not because they couldn't play or that they didn't have talent, but because they couldn't get out of their own way long enough to let their talent actually speak for itself. And that is the real reason Diego Pavia went undrafted, not because he's 5'10", it's not his arm strength, not a poor Senior Bowl showing. It was his attitude and his inability to act in a more professional manner, even when his career literally depended on it. The Ravens minicamp is a lifeline. Whether Pavia grabs it or lets it slip through his fingers the same way he let the draft is entirely up to him. And I do note that there is some type of offer floating around where he has the potential to go to the Canadian Football League if he wants to do that. I don't have enough information on that right now and he hasn't decided yet, so we'll probably hear more about that after his tryout with the Ravens. Just something I wanted to throw in here at the end while I'm editing this video. Now, what do you think? Is Diego Pavia a misunderstood underdog who got punished for having a personality like Shedeur Sanders, or a guy who had every opportunity to clean up his image and chose not to? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into the biggest stories in the NFL. I'll also be making posts where you can go vote on which video topics you'd like to see me cover, so go vote on that whenever you get the chance, and I will see all of you in the next one.